Hello there everybody, my name is Bloomer Brown and welcome back once again to Thoughts in My Thinking Brain, which for any newcomers is something of a loosely formatted series where, unsurprisingly enough, I give voice to various topics that have either been keeping me awake at night or have just piqued my interest in a small way for no particular reason. In today's episode, I'm going to take a little bit of time out to talk about the much anticipated release of Farming Simulator 19, which is of course drawing ever closer. And over the next couple of minutes, I am going to blunder through some of the features and changes that I am most looking forward to. Hopefully I will be able to do that with more temperance and coherence than a small child on Christmas Eve tasked with explaining the nature of Santa Claus. This is of course a roundabout way of me saying that this is not anything that should be treated more seriously than a general discussion on the game, and you probably shouldn't be making any buying decisions based on what I say in this video alone, since it's mostly going to be a lot of me just pointing at the shiny things that I liked the look of in the trailers and the various devlogs. So, Farming Simulator has been around in one form or another since about 2007 or 2008, and like most games, each release basically uses the last as a foundation to build on what has been working, and the game has gotten to a pretty completed stage at this stage. And I think it's mostly the improvements to gameplay and to a lesser extent the UI that have me most excited this time around. There has been a lot of celebration about Fiat and of course John Deere coming to FS19, and while I'm glad to see that, I mean it is a sign that the industry is taking the franchise pretty seriously, and they would of course be foolish not to. But I am coming to this from a non-farming background myself, and the selection of machinery manufacturers is more of a novelty to me since I don't really have any real-world experience of these machines and have no real brand preferences, to be honest. So it is a good thing for the game and a good thing for players, but possibly not as exciting for me as I'm sure it is for some of you. So while I'm keen not to piss all over FS17, because I think it is a particularly good game and is definitely on my list of top recommendations at the moment, there are definitely some areas that needed a little bit of work. Some things just seem to stick out like a sore thumb in an otherwise fairly polished and complete game. I think if we're all being honest for a moment, the shop interface in FS17 could be said to be pretty bad. It feels like something that's kind of been tacked on and seems a little bit unfinished. That's possibly because it has just been carried over from previous versions. But from what I'm seeing from 19, it's finally going to be what it should have been for a while now. We are getting a 3D equipment viewer so that we are going to be able to see the machines that we're going to be purchasing and customizing. It is a small thing, but not being able to see the customizations in shop has always bothered me. I mean, I remember going back to the early days of the Gran Turismo series on the original PlayStation and having this kind of functionality. So I'm delighted to see that it is coming to Farming Simulator at last. It also gives a nice opportunity to have a good look at some of the equipment that you can't possibly afford to buy in the early game without having to wait for it to spawn as part of a contract. Because I think we can all agree that the modelling is pretty decent in FS and deserves to be shown off as much as possible. So yeah, I think this is going to go down pretty well, both with people that have a working knowledge of farm machinery and with people like me who would like some kind of a visual cue as to what we're actually putting onto the tractors before paying for attachments that we really didn't need. So there's obviously been a few other tweaks to the UI and menu system, which is to be expected from a new release, and we're also getting 2 new crops in the form of cotton, which is something completely alien to me, but I'm assuming should work like all other crops. It just has its own specialized harvester. And we're also getting oats, which is actually going to be a useful crop for us since we are going to have a new animal type in the form of horses. And I suppose for all the equine enthusiasts among us, this is going to be a welcome thing indeed. I know that historically there has been a demand for horses in the game, and in fact I think there was actually a mod for that with 17 that added a pony and cart and some feed stations and custom bales, and I think that actually went down pretty well. But this is obviously going to be a far more comprehensive and more integrated system since it's going to be part of the base game. And while I think I'm definitely going to have a go with the horses, personally I think I could take or leave this feature since the fieldwork is mostly what attracts me to the game. And I have to say that there are some fantastic changes coming, and to be honest, it's those changes that fall under this general umbrella of what I'm calling fieldwork that have me most excited. So first off, the buying of land has been changed, and I'm assuming I'll go into more detail on that once the game has actually released. Essentially, it seems that we are now going to be buying plots instead of individual fields, which, from what I can make out, is to facilitate the additional flexibility we are being offered in laying out our farmyards, since everything now comes as a placeable from the shop, including our animal pastures. It's also worth noting that this time around we are going to be constrained by having to set aside sufficient space for our animals. No longer will we be able to cram 500 cows into a garden shed because they are going to need some grazing room. Basically, it seems like we will now be sort of starting from scratch in certain game modes, though I think there will still be the option to start off with a pretty well established farm like we have been doing in FS17. Now this is going to be interesting, especially in multiplayer, since it's going to give players the ability to have their own farmyards as opposed to one sort of community farmyard. And while I have heard it is going to be possible to sell parcels of land, I still haven't seen anything about leasing land from NPC farmers, which is a little bit of a shame, but hey, there are still some massive changes here. And in my opinion, it is a definite improvement since we are going to be given so much control and flexibility, and will now be able to build a yard based on what works for us and the type of farming that we're going to be doing, rather than being constrained by what the devs and map makers give us in terms of more balanced yards that allow for a wider range of work. And I'm sure that we're going to see some players showing off with some fantastically efficient systems in the coming months. Staying on the topic of fields, and more specifically field work, the contracting or mission system is also getting an overhaul. And to be honest, I think I've mentioned before that I kind of dislike contracting work in FS17. I mean, sure, you get to try out the expensive equipment, and as a bonus you get paid for doing it, but I've always found it to be a kind of a dull and pretty grindy aspect of the gameplay, if I'm honest. The new system, however, is shaping up to be something far more interesting. Firstly, the arbitrary restrictions are gone. We are now able to save during an active mission, and the dreaded time limits are no more. Though I'm sure if you were to let a crop wither before you had completed a harvest, you wouldn't get paid for it, or at least wouldn't get paid in full. The fun doesn't end there either, as we are also getting some more variety with the likes of transport missions and also things like baling and grass work making an appearance in the contracting system. We are also going to be able to be a bit more selective in terms of what type of work we want to do, because unlike the last game, we're not going to be driving randomly from field to field looking for work. We're going to have to select our contracts from a menu. So before we arrive on the field, we're basically going to know what the job is and how much it's going to pay. And perhaps most excitingly, well, at least for me, we are going to be able to use our own machinery to complete the contract. Now this is pretty game changing for me, because it's transforming contracting work from what I would call a mildly irritating mini game into something interesting that you will be able to integrate into your business, and perhaps even set up a contracting business altogether and forgo land ownership. Either way, I can see it affecting how you will end up running your farm and where you will want to specialise if that is something you want to do. Though of course you will still be able to hire equipment to complete contracts, so there's still flexibility there if you suddenly wanted to harvest some cotton and are mostly a dairy farmer with grass fields and grass equipment. So yeah, you can still go off and do things in the old way if that's what you choose to do. The contracting system is also coming to multiplayer for the first time, and that's going to be interesting. I don't generally play a lot of multiplayer owing mostly to a slow internet connection, but that is something that I am looking into for the future. So, once you've got your farm set up and have gotten hold of your special companion, you will notice pretty quickly that your own fields are also being treated to some changes and improvements. We are at last getting ground response integrated into the base game, which means that the various machines will behave differently on a paved road as opposed to a freshly ploughed field. Sadly, there still seems to be no mention of seasons making appearance in the game yet, but as a nice consolation prize, we are getting crop destruction in the base game, along with a legitimate use for the weeders that we were treated to in FS17. So I suppose in 17 the weeders basically functioned as fertilizers which you could use to improve your yield. This time around though, when the crops started to grow, so too will various weeds, which are actually going to be modelled in game, and I believe if you don't keep on top of them you could end up losing as much as 20% of your productivity on a field. The weeds themselves are going to have two growth states. The first stage can be dealt with using the mechanical weeders, but if it gets to the second stage you will need to invest in some herbicide to deal with the problem. So I'm particularly interested to see how this is going to be implemented. I'm wondering firstly, will mature crops that have reached some particular growth state be able to crowd out the weeds? And I'm hoping that's going to be the case, because I would hate to be ready to get a combine rolling early in the morning only to discover that a load of weeds have sprouted overnight in an otherwise clean field. I'm also curious to see if this is going to affect grass fields or not. It's certainly going to make things more challenging, but I'm excited about this, and the gameplay trailers for this look excellent when you see the tractors heading out to spray the infested fields. Something else I've noticed is that we are seeing the addition of lime spreading as a replacement for the option of ploughing, which is something I've heard of being done on grass fields, but I'm not actually a farmer myself, so I don't know about the use of it on crop fields, though I'm assuming it will be a valid way of getting nutrients back into the soil. The final change that has piqued my interest, and it is by no means the final change made to the game. I mean, I haven't even begun to speak about some of the graphical changes, nor the changes to the Giants editor, but it seems that while we are out dealing with all of the newly implemented functionality on our fields, we can now do it and watch a more splendid version of nature around us, because birds and deer are now present in the landscape and will be wandering around beneath a new and improved dynamic sky. Because this time around we are getting an actual sun and moon, and also some voxel clouds that are actually going to move and change with the weather. So we should in theory be able to see bad weather rolling in, and perhaps even see the wind rustling through the fields as we head for home at the end of the day. So yes, exciting times ahead for Farming Simulator, and as I say, this video is more a case of me picking out what I am looking forward to. There are many more little tweaks that have been incorporated into the game, but blindly rabbiting off every little change would be beyond the scope of this video. And it's worth noting that there are plenty of videos out there going through the specifics of some of the new machines that have been added to the game already circulating on the platform. I suppose as a finishing word, I'd like to say that I generally dislike overhyping gaming releases and usually wouldn't do videos like this. And I have tried to be as neutral as I can about something that I am clearly looking forward to. I also generally opt not to purchase or pre-order games until I've seen reviews of gameplay from actual human beings here on YouTube, but in certain cases I make what I like to call educated exceptions, a term that I find helps me sleep at night after pre-ordering a game on Steam. And it turns out that FS19, for me at least, is one of these special cases. I feel that Giant Software are probably one of the top developers in terms of not screwing over their customer base and having some respect for what they're doing. Their business practices and how they interact with the community that has grown up around the franchise, both players and modders, has been exemplary. If you've been around the channel for any length of time, you'll probably notice that I'm something of a latecomer to Farming Simulator franchise. That's a fact that has been helped in no small part by the deluge of ill-conceived and poorly executed simulator games that reached something of a meme status a number of years ago. But if you wade through the sludge that is the simulator genre on Steam, there are some genuinely great games out there whose developers actually seem to want to give you a functional and entertaining products. I could mention the likes of Euro Truck Simulator and of course Farming Simulator, which have for me done a great deal to undo the damaged reputation of the genre, and I honestly wish them every success with the upcoming release. So, Farming Simulator 19 is out on PlayStation, Xbox, PC and Mac from the 20th of November. And so long as my computer doesn't run into the ground, I will be more than likely putting out some gameplay videos from then on. Until then, I'm going to take this opportunity to say thank you very much for tuning in. You have been watching Boomer Brown on YouTube, and I will see you next time.